Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started and just have people roll in as we go along. Oh yeah, he said hi, Hannah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma, and I'll be the moderator for today's event, Breaking Barriers, Women in POC and Entrepreneurship. I'm very excited to talk about this topic today and hear from our amazing speakers, and I can't wait to get started. So first, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and then thank you to our wonderful speakers. We're all super excited to hear the discussion today. So just to start off, let's have our speakers give some introduction. So just name, company position, school background, and anything else you would like the audience to know.
Okay. I'll go get started. Okay. Hi, my name is Hannah Fernandez, and I'm the founder and CEO of RI Business Funding, which is a Chicago-based company that funds startups and also established businesses across the U.S. And we also provide them with technical assistance to become fundable. I'm also chair of SCORE Chicago, and SCORE has been around as a resource partner of the SBA since 1964. And we provide free and confidential business mentoring for business owners across the country. So to those of you tuning in with us, if you're a new entrepreneur and you're thinking about starting a business, or if you've been in business for a long time, our SCORE mentors can really help you start, grow, and scale your businesses. And lastly, I graduated from the University of Chicago with a concentration in psychology and biochemistry. So thank you so much for having me.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Seungah. I'm the CEO of Empowered. We're a Brooklyn-based startup that creates solar portable lighting solutions that we sell both in developed retail environments such as REI and Target. But the business model is based around being able to tier our margin structure to also sell our lights in emerging markets because there are 3 billion people without access to electricity. And thus far, we're really proud to have been able to impact 4 million lives and also avert 2.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. I'm also the board chair of SVC, which is a membership-based organization that is focused on creating the next economy. So our members are comprised of entrepreneurs, investors, and those in policy. And we're really trying to change the way that business is able to impact the larger world. I am also a graduate of the University of Chicago, where I double majored in philosophy and environmental studies. Thank you so much for having me here today.
My name is Alida Miranda-Wolff, and I'm the CEO of Ethos, which is a full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion transformation firm. We really focus on helping organizations, especially in technology, growing and growth stage companies in particular, really think about their relationships to power, use their power responsibly, and share their power. So we run that across a consulting practice, a training practice, and a programs practice. And before I was in Ethos, kind of leading this DEI work, I started my career in venture capital. So I grew up in tech, Chicago Tech Week and Chicago Startup Week, and all of these different events are part of how I started to get into entrepreneurship almost a decade ago. So it's really interesting to see how that's progressed over time. But obviously, there are a lot of challenges that entrepreneurs face when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of not just representation, but how folks who are coming from underrepresented groups are actually welcomed and included in organizations, and what access to opportunities they have, in addition to how their individual needs are met. When I'm not running Ethos, I also run a nonprofit organization called Embolden, which is focused on scaling empathy through the power of female friendships. So very much a membership-based organization. And I'm also working on my forthcoming book, Scale Belonging, which will officially come out with HarperCollins in February of 2022. I went to the University of Chicago. I double majored in law, letters, and society and English language and literature with a minor in romance languages. And I remember being at the University of Chicago and everyone in my life saying that my degrees were super useless and could not be applied to anything practical in the world. And what I will say is that when I started working in VC, one of the things that I was most appreciative of is the intensive writing curriculum I had, even in my science classes at the University of Chicago, because skill that I had that a lot of my colleagues didn't, was robust writing skills. So it ended up being very practical in application, even if in theory it didn't necessarily seem that way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys so much for all the introductions. It's really cool to see how you guys have used your UChicago background just to scale these amazing careers. So my first question, just to kick us off today, is when did you know that you wanted to take the entrepreneurial path, and what was your journey like? And we can go in whatever order. If you guys want to keep the same order or switch it up, feel free.
Sure. So I'll start. Life has a way of, really surprising me sometimes. So if you told me when I was in high school that I would be an entrepreneur, I would think that you're out of your mind, because I'm just this big nerd into my books and stuff like that. So I building my own business. So my goal was to get into a prestigious university, work for a top corporation, and make volunteer. So it was kind of like check, check, check. I'd done that. And after graduating from University of Chicago, I raised funds for a nonprofit. And then I worked for Pfizer in pharmaceutical sales for almost 8 years. So I loved my job and I was really great at it. So I learned a lot there about sales and marketing and building relationships in business. And, on the surface, everything seemed so perfect. But every other year since I got hired, I would hear about these, my fellow employees getting their jobs cut. And in 2009, it hit home for me when I lost half of my team in this massive wave of layoffs. And so many positions were eliminated, including that of my district manager and mentor, whom I greatly respect and admire. So that seminal moment was what truly opened my eyes to this lack of job security in corporate America. And that fueled my drive to start thinking about building my own business. And so, months passed and this persistent desire not go away. And in 2011, another wave of layoffs, so over 16,000 positions again were eliminated company-wide, nationwide. And so that layoff, which appeared as adversity to most people in my life, was actually fortuitous for me to finally go ahead and become an entrepreneur, pursue my dream.
It's fantastic, Hannah. So, as I mentioned earlier, I went to the University of Chicago and double majored in philosophy and environmental studies. This was many, many years ago. And at that time, I decided, I wanted to go pursue policy work. So I went to Cambridge, got a graduate degree in environment and development. And I thought, eventually, I'd love to work for the UN or the World Bank. But I grew up in poverty, and I realized as I was going through my next wave of studies that I didn't want to create policy for countries that were emerging without really having a good sense of who I would be affecting by the policy, and whether or not these policies would truly be sustainable and life-changing. So I paused and I decided to go into business. I thought, should I go into banking? Should I go into medicine? Should I go into business? And I just chose business because I was a little bit afraid of medicine, to be honest. And, I thought banking was not very interesting. Mm-hmm. And so I started at Procter & Gamble in Europe, and I just fell in love with the whole world of consumer products. But fast forward several decades, I knew that I still wanted to go back to what I had originally started out working in, which was, the environment, social policy, et cetera. But I just couldn't figure out my way back. And I thought, okay, when I retire, I'll go do that. That's actually when Empowered found me about 5 years ago. And it was a small little company at the time. My founder, John Salzinger, had, 5 other co-founders, but they were looking for some new leadership. And that's when I realized that the entire business world had changed, that things like B Corps, benefit corporations had come into existence. All of a sudden, business could be a force for social good. And it was just this miraculous moment for me where, several decades before, I was like, what am I going to do? How can I actually help the world? I have no skills. I have no knowledge. And all of a sudden, I found that I had a lot of knowledge in the business world, and I could combine that with my original intent. And that's why this job is perfect for me. I sort of fell into being an entrepreneur too. And I'm able to create products that actually affect lives, that, you know, help the environment. And it's such a compelling space to be. And I just wanted to also note that, you know, I'm the proud holder of many patents now. And because, you know, we're also here to talk about technology, less than 5% of patent holders in the US are women. And so I just want to highlight that again, that, you know, this intersection of business and the environment and social good has also helped me push the envelope when it comes to technology and entrepreneurship, and, you know, being able to come up with innovative concepts and ideas. So I'm really proud of the space that I occupy, but I'm really proud that the world has shifted and that businesses, you know, can have this additional, you know, impactful focus.
What strikes me as so interesting is that in listening to Hannah and Seungah today, I really resonate a lot with what they're sharing. So my journey to entrepreneurship was very much one that I didn't expect, that I didn't plan for. It was very circuitous. And there were a lot of reasons why I patently didn't want to pursue it. I was very similar to you, Hannah, very bookish. And even when I was in high school, I couldn't really get into extracurriculars until the very end of my high school tenure because I wanted to be reading, I wanted to be studying. I was the kind of student who read my textbooks before class started, well before in the summer. And I got into the University of Chicago when I was 16. And I had very little knowledge of the world. I, like Seungah, actually grew up in some ways in poverty. I come from a very interesting background in that if you see the hyphen in my name, it very much explains where I come from, in that there's one side of my family, which is the Wolff side of the family, which is white and daughters and sons of the American Revolution and East Coast Ivy League, very Goldwater conservatives. And on the other side of my hyphen, the Mirandas, I have Cuban refugees who are Iberian, West African, practice Santeria, very much part of communism within Cuba, actually spread it across the island for 10 years, worked as diplomats all over the Eastern Bloc in China to promote communism before eventually defecting and having to leave. And I grew up caught between these two worlds. But what was interesting is that neither of these worlds really understood what options existed for me professionally beyond medicine or law. So even though my dad's side of the family was more entrenched in sort of an American ethos, the idea was you were a doctor or a lawyer, which is my dad is a doctor and my aunt is a lawyer. And on my mom's side of the family, they were artists and intellectuals who struggled in poverty always. So I didn't really have a blueprint for what kind of career I would have. I just knew that I needed to be able to provide for myself. And so I assumed I would become a lawyer. And when I went to the University of Chicago, my focus was study as much of the things that you want, because then you're going to have to go be a lawyer, which you'll probably do fine at, but you won't enjoy. And that was something I had sort of decided early on and stuck to. And the idea of entrepreneurship was so foreign to me. I remember I was watching Millionaire Matchmaker with my mom on Bravo, and I was 16 years old, and one of the millionaires was an entrepreneur. And I said, what does that mean? And my mom said, an entrepreneur is someone who is unemployed and doesn't want to admit it. So that was my whole construct of entrepreneurship. And so when I was at the University of Chicago, I really pursued this law path in a few different ways. So I started the undergraduate law review. I'm still the founder of that, even though it's been many, many years since I was at the university. I worked at the law school law review. I actually ran the LSAT program at UChicago. I took the LSAT 2 years early. I actually wrote my thesis on coverture. So I really went into it. Okay, I was all in. I started 2 other student organizations as well. And the last one is the one that's sort of most relevant to my entrepreneurship journey, because I started something called Built at UChicago, which then evolved, and the name sort of changed over time, but it was the first entrepreneurship organization on campus. And I started it with 3 other co-founders. And it was an accelerator, kind of like a mini Techstars, but specifically for college students. And in that process, I had already been working at startups, because my 3rd year of college, I got hit by a car while I was crossing the street. And I had reconstructive surgery. I had to relearn to walk. I learned that university is not a great place to be if you're a person with a disability. And there are a lot of accessibility concerns, and experienced a lot of exclusion firsthand in that identity. But I also realized I didn't want to pursue law because I was going to dedicate my life to something I was already not interested or passionate about. So I had already started going into the startup space. 1871 had just opened, which is the big co-working space and incubator here in Chicago, and I had developed some relationships. So to make a long story short, basically what happened is in running this student organization and working at these startups, I got exposed to venture capital and eventually pursued a career in VC. And in VC cemented this idea that I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, because I had this portfolio of 50 companies and I saw how hard it was for me. So working in my VC firm, I was the first woman ever hired full-time on that team. I was the only Hispanic person working in venture capital in the city of Chicago at the time. And I was one of 27 Latino women working in VC in the country. I was also the youngest director when I became director by 10 years nationally. And those identities really worked against me. It was hard to do my job, but it was especially hard to see where we were investing. Our portfolio very much reflected what the national landscape looks like in VC, which is less than 3% of funding goes to female founders, less than 1% of funding goes to Black female founders. And so I really came to DEI after a stint in nonprofits and then management consulting in VC because I wanted to make my working conditions better, and because I also identified with my founders more than anyone else. And in doing that work, I really realized that this is what I had been working towards my whole life, this sense of not belonging anywhere, of wanting to advocate for marginalized groups, especially in terms of working conditions, of growing up in a family that was openly racist and discriminatory against my mom, who was the center of my life and still my best friend. I thought this is where I can really have an impact. And so finally, I just felt that I didn't have a choice. I was going to pursue diversity, equity, and inclusion. There wasn't enough of that to be my full-time job in VC. And as I looked at opportunities, I realized there was this chance that I had to build a model specifically for growing and growth stage companies. 3 years later, Ethos serves 60 plus clients. We work all across the country. We're a 7-person team growing to be a 10-person team. And all of this is a big surprise to me. I set out in this entrepreneurship journey really coming from a place of the mission, really investigating what it would mean to be a social impact business, and ultimately being very interested in structured equity. How is it that we can really give marginalized groups access to opportunity, but also the support that they need to really account for all of that historic power imbalance and marginalization?
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. That was really cool to hear hear about where all you guys started and where you are all now. And so thank you again. The next question I wanted to shift to was, what do you enjoy most about being an entrepreneurship or being an entrepreneur? And what is the hardest part about it?
One of the things that I love about being an entrepreneur is that you can create your own economy, and you could actually choose to go ahead and surround yourself with the best people. And so as far as for challenges, as you all know, running a business involves so many moving parts, and being an entrepreneur can be lonely at times. So I had to surround myself with really trusted mentors and also the best people who knew more than I did. So one of the lessons I learned is I had to be comfortable in my own skin and really not be intimidated about what I don't know. When you're doing all the right things, I want everybody that's listening to understand that sometimes it may take a lot longer than expected, and it may take a lot more resources and money to succeed, but you have to keep showing up. Just put yourself and really keep on testing to see what works and what doesn't. And the market, competitors will, clients will. And so what success really did for me, success required me to because as Seungah and Alida and Emma, you may know, people don't it takes, that rejection that we all entrepreneurs face, and that blood, sweat, and tears to build a truly. And so most people only get to see the finished product. Oh, wow, she's so successful. But they don't see all the different times that you're alone at night and huddled up with your team saying, what are we going to do next? Something just came up. And remember, night success is really just this culmination of consistent efforts that you put over time, and sometimes years in the making. And another thing that I really want to go ahead and make sure is at the forefront of the listeners is you also have to be prepared, because it's so successful brand and all the orders are flooding in, the right people, those systems and processes, and also sometimes capital to make sure that you're going to be able to orders to make sure that you become prepared for that success.
So I find the most rewarding thing about entrepreneurship is that it is a space where you can embody your values. It may be because of the type of organization that I'm with, that we are a B Corp and a benefit corporation, very focused on impact. But not only is it rewarding, it's essential. So sometimes I'm asked, when I'm speaking, well, if it comes to a choice between a huge order, but maybe, there's something about that order that isn't quite aligned with your values, but it's a really huge order, what do you do? And I've just noted that throughout my journey, that it's critical to keep your values first and foremost, whether it's through your employees and how you treat and interact with them, whether it's through those business choices you make. So even with respect to the example that I just gave you, we were faced with a situation like that a couple of years ago. It was a huge order, but it was at such a crushing price that I knew I would have to go back to our supply chain and really negotiate an unsustainable price, and that we couldn't actually employ our impact model, which is based around, healthy margin sales in, economies where, we can sustain that in order, again, to tier our margins for emerging markets. And I knew that even with the size of the sale, based upon the margins, we couldn't fulfill our basic business model. And so we turned it away because we knew that it was just unsustainable for us as a business. And it was an example of how sometimes, you're faced with these choices that you think could be good for what you're doing, but you realize ultimately that if they undermine the very underpinning of what you're trying to accomplish somewhere down the road, right, you will be affected by that business choice. So it's been extremely rewarding, actually, to constantly put that, front and center, that value model, to ensure that the success that we've been able to garner is very real, and that to us has translated very effectively through our retail partnerships, to our consumers, through the press, etc. And so it's just rewarding to see that whole ecosystem. The greatest challenge for me is also somewhat related, and that is capital, because capital is a little bit slower, in my opinion, to move towards this value-driven approach. No disrespect to those organizations that have managed to do this successfully, but being in technology, I have been exposed to a lot of more traditional VC and PE firms, and it is extremely difficult as a woman and as a person of color to be able to find that values alignment. But it is critical. And so I just am transparently sharing this for entrepreneurs, because sometimes you need that capital, or you believe you need it so severely that you may make compromises when it comes to that. But it's really important to remember that the person or the firm providing that capital is going to own part of your business, is going to be your business partner. So when you talk about being able to make choices based upon value and your value system, it's critical that who you choose in that sphere is aligned with you. So really glad to hear about some of the work that, and some of the thought processes you went through, Alida. I just think that there's so much room for some change in that space. And, again, no disrespect to anyone out there, in VC and PE, but to me, that's that part of being an entrepreneur has been the most challenging because it's been a slower space in terms of change.
It's interesting, that you asked this question, Emma, because when I was still in VC, a huge part of my life was talking to my entrepreneurs, and I would meet with 1,000 people a year. That was sort of the target, the number, so that we could invest in maybe 20. And as a result, I developed this mental model of what would be good about being an entrepreneur and what would be hard about being an entrepreneur. And there were things that I took for granted as being cliche or rote and didn't take seriously. And so I remember when I started on this entrepreneurship path, what I thought was going to be hard is not what was hard. So I remember coming into this and thinking, wow, I just don't have the technical skills, and how am I going to manage legal and compliance and finance and all of these things that go into running a business. And I successful entrepreneur at the time. He had just sold his company for about $100 million. And he said, Alida, if I have any advice for you, it's on day one, hire an accountant and a good lawyer, and then don't worry about that part. And it was something that completely flipped my attitude and my mentality about entrepreneurship, because I was thinking about entrepreneurship as something that I had to do completely and entirely on my own. And you have to understand that even in the tech companies that we funded, there was this myth of the solo founder who did all of this work on their own brilliance and all-knowingness, even though I knew those founders and didn't believe that about them and saw that they hired teams and had co-founders and advisors and board members. The pressure of that, I would say, sort of Uberman ethos translated onto me, and I felt that pressure. And so coming into entrepreneurship, I think what I have ended up enjoying the most is the room for experimentation and creativity. I started a business around who I am as a person and what I believe in, so very similar to some of the things that I'm hearing from the other panelists here today. And I realized that I could hew to those. So in my previous organizations, if I didn't agree with or believe in the organization that I was partnering with, I could protest, but I couldn't cut ties. Now I can. I have a choice in who I work with and who I don't work with. I have a choice in what I say and what I don't say. And I think about this just in terms of one of the things I appreciate about being a business owner is that when we have seen instances of racial violence, I am able to very publicly and openly not just call for change in the business community, but lobby policymakers, talk to government officials, and say, I'm not afraid to do this. And if I lose business over it, I'm not going to get fired as a result. I will deal with those consequences, but I can live those values. And I can also try the things that I want to try. If I want to integrate a healing-centered engagement approach into our work, there's no one saying, well, that doesn't seem aligned with our product roadmap. Well, I built the product roadmap, so the argument is with myself. And there is a lot of freedom and enjoyment in that I appreciate and that I almost took for granted in the beginning. I thought that wasn't something that would really matter to me. And you have to also understand that I had always seen myself as a second in command. And I had been a second in command. I had moved into that role twice before. I thought that I was a very good deputy. I was very organized. I didn't realize until I became an entrepreneur that I had internalized stereotypes about my gender and viewed myself as really only capable of being support as opposed to an operator. And that really the visioning, the intellection, the ideation is where I got my most creative energy. And even now, I have so much guilt associated with that because I feel that I should be more relational and caretaking and supportive of my team. And when I am not with them, I have this pull on me when I'm sitting down with my strategic plan, or when I am figuring out a new product. I'm thinking to myself, but shouldn't I go support more people? Shouldn't I give my clients more time? Shouldn't I give my team members more time? And I do think that grappling with the ways in which identity affects how you show up in entrepreneurship is something we don't talk about professionally enough and don't prepare folks for. And those messages that we internalize, that we repeat to ourselves, inform our work. I think the hardest part about being an entrepreneur, and Hannah started to say this, the loneliness of it, it's a crushing amount of responsibility. I have no desire to sugarcoat that. You have people on your payroll and you have to run that payroll. If you don't meet your numbers, what are you going to do? Not pay your employees? I've been in that situation a number of times where I have had that crushing fear and sense of responsibility. And there's also just all of these complicated situations that you have to deal with, choices that you have to make that you haven't been faced with before. This idea of with great power comes great responsibility, but a lot of times you actually don't have that much power, but people perceive you as having it. So you have all of the responsibility, but maybe not the authority. I can't control what my client does, but as their partner and as the intermediary between them and my team, for example, I am perceived as having all of that power. And I bring this up because even though we did not and will never take venture funding as an organization and are not in a space where we should, because we're in the services space and the multiple just wouldn't be a good return for VCs. The thing that I will say is entrepreneurs think that they're going to go into this, and the best part is that they're not going to have a boss. But your board is your boss. Your investors are your boss. You have more bosses than when you work in a company. For me, every single one of my 60 clients is my boss. And they have a lot of different ways that they can get me to do what they want me to do. It's just that I'm perceived as not having one. And so there's this caught in between a rock and a hard place situation that I constantly have to navigate, and alone, because part of being the founder is that you don't put that pressure on your employees and your teammates, that you do keep that to yourself because you took on that mantle. And so one of the lessons I learned was that I did need to see a therapist, and I'm really open about that. Before I started my business, I was not in therapy, and I started talking to all of these other entrepreneurs who said, you need a therapist who specializes in entrepreneurship. And I realized after I started seeing my therapist how true that was, because there wasn't someone to process these things with in an open and vulnerable way that wouldn't compromise my position in other kind of key areas. One thing that I like to remind people, and it's Casper de Kuhl who originally said this, but when you're the founder, you have to think about it like this in terms of power. How can you be in community with someone you can fire? The imbalance is there. So you need to build a support system around you because you're still a human person. It's just that the way that you interact with people takes on a different shape when you're in that role. And all I'll say, last note before I just monopolize this conversation completely, is that when I wasn't an entrepreneur and I heard founders talk about founders therapy and the need to process and have a forum and have a group and all of the feelings associated, I dismissed that. And I thought that's not going to be the big part. That's not going to be the important part. But if we think about that very sort of recycled question, what keeps you up at night? Honestly, interpersonal situations. It's not my P&L, honestly. And part of that is that I've had the good fortune of having a growing business where we've been profitable since month 2. So I haven't had the same struggles associated, but it hasn't been, oh my gosh, I didn't get my MBA. I ultimately deferred instead of going to Booth to start my business. I said I would do a more emotionally expensive form of business school. And that was my choice. But I thought that was going to be it, that I was going to regret so much that I didn't put those 2 years in. And that's what was going to hold me back. No, honestly, what has been the hardest part is just dealing with my feelings in a very weird and uncomfortable position.
Yeah, no, thank you all for sharing. That was really awesome advice, especially for the young entrepreneurs listening in today. Next, I wanted to sort of shift gears into a different aspect of our conversation today of facing entrepreneurship as a woman and as a person of color. So first, I just wanted to ask, along with the hardships that you all just shared, what have been the biggest challenges you've faced as a woman and as a person of color specifically in entrepreneurship?
When it comes to access to capital, women and minorities continue to face these barriers. So it's one of these things where we really have to be intentional in promoting economic empowerment. And the reason why a lot of women and minorities are not being as successful as fast as they can be is that they are missing that access to not only funding, but also the networks, the opportunities, and all the other resources that, everybody else does. And so there's so many studies and also real life examples that show that when an organization really fosters diversity and inclusion, line also improves. So one of another aspect of the challenges that I had to go through is that I'm always in a male dominated organization. And so it's really up to, one of the things that I see when it comes to men and women is women seem to have to prove that they can do something. And so I'm sitting here like, do you know that this is not, my first time ever leading organizations, but people expect women to prove themselves. While with men, they get hard on potential. And so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Hannah, for kicking off the conversation around access to capital. I'm going to start first with a story when I was younger and one of my earlier jobs in corporate America, and it was a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was in charge of a huge software contract. And so all of these vendors came in during the course of the day. And I remember this one vendor came in with 10 male executives. It was a pretty lucrative contract. So, they brought out the best of the best. And these 10 men filed into the room. And I was already in the room. And they saw me and they said, "Oh, great. Could we have some coffee?" And, and I said, "Oh, sure." So I took everyone's orders, came back like with all the coffees and waters. And then I sat down and I said, "Shall we begin now?" And you should have seen their faces, because obviously they thought I was there for another reason, right? And clearly they didn't get the contract. But I would say that being underestimated is a very consistent occurrence that I've experienced in almost every job that I've had. And it's become even more pervasive the higher I've climbed up. And, I used to battle it and try to assert myself, try to prove myself, try to be a louder voice than I am. And then sort of midway throughout my career, I realized that that's not my voice, that I actually prefer to take a back seat, listen to the conversation, try to think through the dynamics of what's happening, what do I want to accomplish, what is the main aim here, and then speak up. So I found that, this style that I was trying to take on was something that I had learned along the way, that I was supposed to be this other person, this person with traditionally more male characteristics. I also learned about all the micro inequities that exist, because not only, am I on the surface, someone who looked very different in the boardroom, but also because I grew up in poverty, I didn't have access to the same language. So I remember going to one investor conference and everyone was talking about, I hope I get this right, parasailing, and about like different, vacation options and golfing and all of these things I'd never had access to. And still as an adult, like I've never actually even been to the symphony, I'll tell you, because it was just not part of the cultural lexicon of growing up. It was, spend the money on food, right? So I noticed that I was unable to participate in some of these conversations that were happening very fluidly. And I turned to my male co-founder at one of these events and I said, "Help, like I feel so out of place. I don't even know how to start these conversations or where to jump in. And this advice was so telling. He was like, you just need to go up and smack them on the back, just like this, pound them on the back. And I said, excuse me, I'm supposed to like physically, and he's like, yeah, just smack them on the back like that, which is kind of funny advice. But again, it was just telling that, be it physically, be it, through past references, be it through just the way that I showed up, that I lacked access to all of these little tools that were part of this language that, was unknown to me, that these investors were using with each other. And so eventually I just decided I needed to embrace the fact that I'm underestimated, that I'm not seen, that I'm any number of these like sort of words that I never thought internally related to me. I reframed them and I thought, okay, they don't see me. They underestimate me. So how can I use that to my advantage? How can I sit there and listen and watch the power dynamics and underneath it try to ascertain what they're looking for, what they need? And somehow I managed quietly to use that to my advantage when seeking out capital, when seeking out partners, when seeking out alignment. But I will say it is a lot of extra work and energy that some days I still wish I did not have to engage in, that I could simply have a face-to-face conversation with someone, recognize that our values are aligned, we have a common purpose, we want to work towards X, Y, and Z aim. But I recognize that there's still work to be done. And so I speak out about it much more than I did many years ago when I thought, I am an entrepreneur, I am a business person, and I never used pronouns. I never described myself as a person of color. I never said I was a woman, never, because I thought I'm a person, I am me, this is what I'm doing. But now, when speaking with other entrepreneurs, when speaking with students, just, in general, I'm finding that there is a need to talk about this. Because if we don't talk about some of these micro inequities, then I think that they exist anyway. And so calling them out, talking about them, talking through strategies of how to overcome them or work through them, I think has become, important for me. So I'm glad to be here today to talk not only about the work that each of us are doing, but some of the challenges based upon, who we are or who we're perceived to be.
A lot of what I'm hearing very much speaks to my experience, this idea that Hannah brought up of women are promoted on performance and men are promoted on potential, or this idea of not having the language, not having the jargon, understanding that it's not just gendered, but also class-oriented, race-oriented. And so what I can speak to from my personal experience is in terms of my identities, I've had specific kinds of challenges that I think might be a little bit unique in this group. One, because in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I am often told I don't count because I'm not marginalized enough, because I am often the token. So organizations are hiring my firm and they want the team to look more diverse than their own. And so they want me to have more marginalized identities, and they want me to be really, really candid about all of the ways in which I have been oppressed and members of my team have been oppressed. And this is a kind of credibility for some of them. And obviously the clients we work with, we don't feel this way about. And often what we say is our team is very diverse so that we can provide better recommendations and hold space for more identities in the room. And we certainly believe in the power of representation. But that's something that's a little bit different. And then yet, I still feel a lot of the challenges of being a woman. And I understand my privileges as a cisgender woman. and the ways in which I have more opportunity and more access to upward mobility and economic success. I understand the ways in which my whiteness privileges me, especially because I've seen the ways in which I am now painfully outperforming my mother, and I will out-earn her for the rest of my life. And I know a big part of that is the way that she looks versus the way that I look. And so I know it and I see it and I can feel it. And it doesn't change the fact that I still experience micro inequities, microaggressions, micro invalidations, and insults on a regular basis. And I think what I'll share is kind of two of the challenges that come up the most. The first is around just being an only, and the kind of pressure it puts on you to represent every single person like you. So not only have I grown up in male-dominated industries, I was in industrial manufacturing, and then I was in technology, and then I was in venture capital. But I was in these spaces where folks really identify as being very progressive. And that is challenging. I have a mentor in the DEI space who has said more than once that he would prefer to go work with white supremacists from the Aryan Brotherhood in prisons than go teach people at Google, because at least one of those groups would be honest with him. And it's a dark joke, but it carries some weight, because it's a lot harder to show somebody that the comment that they made, that the way that they excluded you, that the way that they're constructing you is coming from a place of bias. And, as this group has talked about, really underestimating you when they believe that they're on your side. It challenges their identity. And, one of my favorite TV shows of all time is Legion, which was on FX, and I really recommend it. But there's a scene in the season 2 finale where our anti-hero is in a group of friends who's essentially saying, you need an intervention. And one of the people in the group says, the way that you see yourself is not the way that we see you. And that's a challenge that I'm confronting. I can't tell you how much unsolicited advice I get. And that is what I would say is the second challenge of being a woman. There is a cottage industry telling me the ways that I should and should not be, and the ways in which the fact that I participate in a system that is fundamentally broken, that I should take personal responsibility for it. It's not the problem that we have pay inequity. The problem is that I don't negotiate. So here's what I'm going to say. We shouldn't have to negotiate because organizations should pay a fair market wage, right? We should have equal pay for equal work. So when I hear, and even other women saying, this is your fault, you should negotiate, stand up, you shouldn't have to negotiate. It shouldn't have to be something that you do. Organizations should be paying above market, and they should be offering the same wage for the same candidates. Right? Or I often say, sorry is a tax on women. If I get corrected one more time for saying, oh, sorry about that, or sorry, and saying that I'm apologizing for my existence, no, I'm not. It's the same thing as saying or like. You're just reminding me of my place and telling me that I have to speak in a certain way, which is with more confidence, with more polish, with more self-reflection than you would ask of someone else. And so what I would say is really challenging is people feel very comfortable telling me the way that I should be and not actually recognizing the way that I am. And so I really appreciate when I see woman-identified leaders leading with the way that they are. And I also think that we have this just kind of girl power idea that plays into our existing power structures. And I wish that we could move beyond this conversation of how do you lean in? You don't have to lean in. This is a whole situation of all of the things that you have to do as opposed to really addressing the problem, which is the system that we're part of, that says that you have to work twice as hard as much. It shouldn't be the case. But I would also just point out here that as a woman entrepreneur and as someone with a lot of friends who are women entrepreneurs, you deal with sexual harassment. I certainly have. You deal with comments about your life. You deal about people talking about your body in ways that are so not okay. I have man-identified facilitators, no one has ever commented about their weight. On a regular basis, I've had people comment on my weight. I had a person who rejected what I said because they said that they didn't think that I had enough self-discipline as somebody who was overweight to really tell them how to operate. And I think about how gendered that statement is, and also how it plays into body type and size. I have people regularly ask me when I'm going to have a baby and how it's going to impact my business and whether I should have a baby and if I'm set up for that. I've had multiple people, women and men, encourage me to freeze my eggs. I'm telling you this because these are professional conversations. These are not my close friends. This is not my inner circle. People feel comfortable having those conversations with me because of my gender identity. And I will tell you, I was not prepared for that as an entrepreneur, that when people told me how to run my business, they would tell me how to run my body.
And Emma, I just want to go ahead and jump in, in response to Alida and Seungah. Being a woman and minority, especially for those people listening, being mediocre is not an option at all. SCORE's been around since 1964, yet I became the first woman to be chair, and it's the year 2020 already. Why is that? Why is it that, we don't even have the first woman president yet in the United States? In other countries like the Philippines, Korea, and India, they've already had women leaders. Why are we so behind? And so, as I became the first woman chair of SCORE, and I had some executive coaches with me, one of the things that I told them is, as I continue to grow and become more powerful, I do not want to turn like a man. I do not want to lose being feminine, because I want everybody to understand that you can be powerful and be feminine at the same time. And the way we can do that is be excellent at what you do. Be so good that they cannot ignore you. And this goes to both your haters and also your fans as well. Just be that good that they can no longer ignore you. And so wherever you are, whether you're in school, a corporation, working in government, or in business, just be the best that you can be and deliver those outstanding results, because those results will speak for themselves.
Thank you. That was such an amazing, powerful conversation. And Hannah, I love how in your first point you brought up barriers. And I think that this session so far has just shown how amazing women like you all are just breaking these barriers and stereotypes when it comes to women in entrepreneurship overall. And so going off of this last question, I wanted to continue the conversation and ask, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? And what role does D&I play in the entrepreneurship field? And kind of as a follow-up, how can we continue to improve this in both the field itself and in our own lives?
Definitely. As I mentioned earlier before, when it comes to inclusion and equity, especially, women remains, and also minorities, underrepresented in government, in business, and so many other industries. And when you look at the bottom line, when you have diversity, when you have equity and inclusion, it affects companies in such a positive way. And one of the things that women has is there's actually many organizations, they're in trouble. They would actually go ahead and bring in a woman to go ahead and turn around that organization. And time again, women who are brought in to go ahead and turn around sinking organizations have done it successfully. So these results speak for themselves. Women and minorities don't have to prove themselves. We've done it so many times already. And it's just a matter of the governments and corporations following that heed and taking that call. Because when women are given access to opportunities and networks, access to capital, then they can completely grow their business in a much greater and faster way. Because when women go ahead and become successful, we are very community driven. So we not only take care of ourselves, we also take care of our families and our communities. And so women not only think about themselves, but we think of the community as a whole. So when we support women in business and in corporations as they move up the ladder, as they build their businesses, we also help communities prosper and success. And when you think about, women in business, next to government, when you think about it, small businesses are really the biggest employers in the United States. I mean, imagine that. It's Main Street, not Wall Street, that provides these millions of jobs and employment for people in our country. So when we intentionally collaborate to level the for small businesses, especially for women, can't forget our veterans and other minority-owned businesses, especially those who are underserved, we give them that platform to contribute and really showcase their genius. And when we do that and succeed, when minorities succeed in business, thrive, our communities also prosper.
So for us at Empowered, we take DEI on a very broad scale because we service the world in terms of who our customers are. We're distributed in 90 different countries, and we're sort of agnostic about almost every marker of, what our demographics are that, a traditional marketer would look at. We're equal in terms of gender, in terms of geography, in terms of socioeconomic background. We sell to last mile destinations all around the world. We also sell to those, who use our products purely for, outdoor recreational use. So when we look at our office, the composition of our team, we do think about who we serve globally, and we stretch that definition as wide as possible. So some of the things that I like to think about and talk about have to do with, inclusion on a broad scale. So you've heard me talk a little bit about, my background, growing up poor. To me, that's a crucial difference that doesn't get talked about as much in business. And to me, it's really important that level of diversity also exists, people with different backgrounds. So, I purposefully try to seek, whether on for internships or for full-time positions, people with different backgrounds, not just, students who have had access all their life to opportunities, who then apply to us for, a tech job. I also very much believe in those with disabilities. So every company that I've been at, we purposely look to hire those with disabilities. One key thing that I've noted when we've done this is that it really reframes the conversations that happen within the office. I will give you an example. In the past, I've often had someone on the autism spectrum scale as part of the office. And, the way that many of these individuals think is very unique. And one characteristic that has been predominant is this extremely logical focus. And when someone like this is in the workplace and they're extremely logical, it changes the way you think about things. I'll give you an example. I had, one individual working on legal contracts for me, just, categorizing them and letting me know which contracts are still active. And he came to me and he said, technically, I think this legal contract is active because it was signed, it hasn't expired, but I'm not really sure because it's entirely in Chinese. And I thought about it and I said, that's actually a really good point. Someone signed this, we have no idea what it says, and we've counted it as being an active, vendor contract, but he was absolutely right. So I just think that diversity and inclusion are extremely broad, and the more we can strive to sort of represent the world in which we exist and bring all of those different kinds of skill sets and opinions and thoughts and experiences to the table, the richer the experience. But to do that, there is a recognition that access is frequently an issue, and also structure. So I'm with you, Alida. pay, healthcare. There's certain givens to me that are irrespective of whatever category you belong in or characterize yourself as. It should be based upon the work and the work product, etc. So those are the two things like I do keep in mind: access and structure, to make sure that from my point of view as an entrepreneur, that I'm careful to provide the correct structure for equity and to do my best when it comes to access, to reach out and to find other avenues of creating that diversity within our workplace.
I run a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm, and I work with entrepreneurs on integrating DEI into what they do. So I'm take a step back and just do some basic definitional work. The way that we define diversity at Ethos is variety. So diversity is just the presence of difference within a contained environment. You can think about biodiversity in that construct. However, we often can use that definition of diversity to ignore social identity and the ways in which we have really distributed power unevenly across different social identities. So when we talk about diversity at Ethos, we actually mean 12 different social identities that we're looking at. We're seeing how they show up in people in the workplace beyond just gender identity and race and color, which are very important. In this conversation, we've also talked about socioeconomic class. We've talked about education. We've talked about body type and size. We talked about class. We haven't talked about veteran status, but it's there too. We're more increasingly at Ethos trying to call attention to tribal and indigenous affiliation, to caregiver status, especially during COVID. So there are all of these different identities that play into diversity. Inclusion is really an experience that an individual has in an organization where they feel welcomed and fully leveraged for who they are within that organization. And so, like diversity, inclusion is an outcome. You can measure diversity in terms of who is there. Inclusion, you can measure by asking people whether they feel included, which is something that we recommend that you do and that you keep track of over time. Equity is really about that relationship between power and fairness, recognizing that power is unequally distributed, and therefore it's not enough to provide access. Access is where we start, and it's important as a baseline, but that's equality, right? And what we need to do is not only provide the access, but provide the support to take full advantage of that access. So one of the things that I'll say is an example of that, Seungah, to use your investor conference. Access is that you got to go to that conference. Equity would have been that people would have helped you understand that language or use different language altogether so that you could participate in those conversations, which is why equity is a process, right? It is the set of practices and behaviors and cultural norms that we institute day in and day out that make diversity and inclusion possible in an organization. Where I think it's so important in entrepreneurship, just because I know where we are with time and I could talk about this forever, is to think about it in the phenomenon that we really see in entrepreneurs today, which is this idea of over-mentored and underfunded. At a certain point, we have to accept that if we're specifically going to talk about woman-identified and BIPOC founders in this conversation, they are being constantly told to be mentored and go through mentoring programs, and they are beneficial, but what is that tied to? If what you need is money, what is advice going to do for you? Make you feel supported, maybe give you some ideas, maybe some ideas you can't act on because you need the money to do it. And so that doesn't mean that I advocate for getting rid of mentoring. Mentoring is extremely valuable, and it's something that we should offer and programs should exist, but we often offer mentorship instead of doing the hard work of giving these opportunities to the people who deserve them and need them and should have a shot, right? And so for those of you who are entrepreneurs in the room or are thinking about entrepreneurship opportunities, how to build up entrepreneurship in your organization, this is a question. Are you really backing up the verbal support with actual resources for change? Because if you aren't, we won't really progress that much. We're still riding on this challenge that I think Hannah spoke to before, which is every single one of those people coming from marginalized identities now has to be the best, and they have to work twice as hard for half as much. What could we do so that they only have to work as hard? not twice as hard to have that opportunity. So thinking about where to close the opportunity gap and what will truly create that, that's really, I think, where the conversation needs to go in DEI and entrepreneurship.
Thank you all for bringing up those points. I think that really opened my eyes to some ideas that even I can do to start beginning to change. And then I think I can speak on behalf of everyone that this hour has gone by so fast. Just to everyone in the audience, I just wanted to let you guys know we do end in roughly 23 minutes. And so I did want to open the floor if anyone has any questions they would like to put in the chat, or if you are in the audience, you can request to share your audio and video and I can bring you up into the panel. So I'll wait for some questions, and if none come, no worries. We still have plenty more that we didn't quite get through, but I think it was a great conversation. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to go in depth and share your experiences. So yeah, if anyone has a question, you can drop them in the chat or request to share your audio and video. But I guess we can keep going. I think one important question I definitely wanted to hit is, what have you taken from your college experience to your startup career, if anything, and what do you wish maybe you would have gotten involved in college too, if there is anything that would have helped you along your journey?
So one of the things that I really keep is prioritizing, because whether I was in college or even in high school until now, always so many different activities that, I'm being pulled in different directions to be involved in. And so, people really do business, with those they like and they trust. And part of that you got to be the type of person who delivers. And so in order for you to go ahead and follow through and keep your word, you got to make sure that you not only manage your time, but also your energy. So prioritize and focus on what's important, and also learn how to say no to things that are not aligned with your values and your goals. So if you go ahead and set those boundaries in advance, you can really go ahead and focus on what's most important to you. And you'll be that much more successful.
College. I would go
and not
back
as stressed
if I
out as well.
could. To me, it was the perfect ecosystem of being surrounded by the most amazing people, both students and professors, and just the community, because I was living on campus, and just the whole experience. And it was really a great place to very safely, in some ways, experience what life could be like, with the conversations that occur, and learning about, just different pathways you could take in life, and to be exposed to a broad diversity of people and backgrounds and experiences. And I just think, even beyond the things that you actually learn in college, that ecosystem is so important. And you do bring that with you as you enter the workplace, where, I don't want to use the word that is less safe, but definitely, in the sphere of entrepreneurship, there are pressures. There are things you have to deliver. It's on a completely different scale. So finding comfort with yourself, learning what's important to you, what do you want to do, how do you want to interact with people, all of those things kind of happen in college. And so I just think it's a wonderful time to get to know yourself and to get to know, the broader world. What was the second part of your question, Emma? Oh, you're...
I was on mute. I think you did a great job answering that, and
okay.
Definitely gave some takeaways for the people listening in.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, because I loved college. I mean, I really loved college, and I think that there was a lot of pressure riding on college because, you know, I moved a lot when I was growing up, and I didn't make a whole lot of close friends, and I didn't have the sense of my community. And my parents just kept saying, wait until you get to college, everything will be better. And I had put so much pressure on the college experience. But literally my first day of orientation week, I met my husband and my best friend in line moving into my house, which no longer exists at U Chicago, but I lived in Blackstone House. And so I think if I think about my college experience, what U Chicago did for me that I am so extremely grateful for, apart from the fact that I really benefited from the small class sizes and the very stimulating environment. It was when I wrote my college admissions essay, I wrote about the fact that I belonged in a place where fun went to die, because I wanted to study all the time, and people thought I was so boring and uncool, but I wanted to study and I wanted to read, and it made me feel good that I was in an environment where people spent more time in the library than any other university in the United States. And so I think that I would go back to college too. I have actually been in school the entire time that I've been out of school. I've gotten a secondary degree and then another one and then a certification. And then I just finished at Georgetown for something else. And then I went to the School of the Art Institute. Like, I have constantly tried to go back to school. And there is a certain element of it that is utopic. The workplace is not the same. One of the things that I really am excited to say that I did and was a good choice was I worked full-time the entire time I was in college. And it prepared me for two things. One, it prepared me for the fact that you are a different kind of tired when you are a worker than a student. And it's something that I tell my interns all the time. And actually that I'm going through with my husband, because he just finished his PhD in synthetic biology and has now, for the first time, almost at the age of 30, started a full-time job, and he is exhausted. It's just a different kind of brain power. There's a lot less flexibility in your schedule. There is the emotional work of having to present yourself in a certain way. You have less autonomy. So there was this element of, I was more prepared for that because I was working when I was in college. But the other reason that I was very fortunate to, it's kind of a plus and a minus. I had to pay all my own bills, so I needed to work. There was no other way around it. But I experimented so much. I had 6 different jobs. By the time that I had finished college, I understood that, one, I didn't have to have the perfect path or the perfect career, or that the first job that I had wasn't going to define me. A lot of that pressure was removed, and I already knew what I liked and didn't like. And so what I would say is I would encourage folks in college today to experiment as much as possible and try as many different things as possible. And I don't have any regrets about my college experience, but the one thing I will say is when I graduated, I had almost a perfect GPA, and I actually do regret that. I was really focused on being academically excellent to the point that I didn't take certain classes because I wanted to. I got a C+ my first quarter at U Chicago, and what happened to me as a result was I didn't leave my room for 3 days, and my mom got really worried, and I had to go back home. And then I said, this will never happen again. And I never got anything less than an A for the rest of my 4 years at U Chicago. But it meant that I would not take certain classes. And now that I'm in my professional career, a few things. Nobody ever looked at my GPA ever again, even though it was hard won and I was so proud of it. Nobody looked at it, especially because I didn't go into investment banking. Which is where it mattered for a lot of my friends who were coming up at the same time as I did. And there are things that I'm now learning and classes that I'm now taking that I wish I had taken then, because I was so afraid that I was going to get a B. Like, that's the worst thing in the world. And so I think that I was entrepreneurial about my jobs, but not about what I studied. And so the idea that I would leave with all of you is just, what about really going out there and saying, what am I most interested in, as opposed to what am I best at? Because I think that I felt so much pressure all the time to prove people wrong. I'll be totally candid with all of you. When I started at U Chicago, my dad said, look around, Alida, because everybody here is smarter than you and they're going to do better than you do. And I had that in my head. And there were very traditional ideas about a woman's role in my family growing up, which is where a lot of that was coming from. But I felt this tremendous pressure for that not to be true. And I didn't feel that confidence to say this isn't true. And so I held myself back from learning opportunities that now, I'm engaging with voraciously, and I'm so excited about that. But I would just say, this is your time to be exploratory, so do it.
Yeah, no, thank you all. I think that was great advice for people still in college like myself and people listening in on the call. We finally got our first question, so thank you. My apologies if I pronounced your name wrong, but Peja asked, what is your comment on women at work acting like a man versus to be like yourself?
I'll definitely take that. As I've grown to be a businesswoman, one of the things that I was really intentional about is becoming more and more powerful without losing my femininity. So even when I work with, my coaches, I said, I do want to learn. I want to go ahead and keep on growing in a business sense, in a personal sense, increase your emotional intelligence, all that kind of stuff. But I want to be a woman. And I never want to lose my feminine energy, because there's something special and powerful about a woman who uses her charm, her intellect, and the whole package to get the work done. And so to those of you who are listening, I like my nice dresses and my nice heels, but I'm getting some work done. So definitely be yourself.
Sorry, I didn't know if we were all answering that question. So I agree, be like yourself. I will say, though, that I want to take a tiny bit of time to talk about the fact that I don't think that everything is binary. Like I understand that there's a generic perception of what it means to act like a man, but in all fairness to my founder and to other key members of our team, I found that it's not binary at all, that there are a lot of different ways of interacting that, once you can kind of put aside certain perceptions, it frees up the opportunity to really focus on the real constraints or issues or opportunities. So one example is that, when I first joined the organization, many times, different employees would say to me, "Oh, I noticed that so-and-so was mansplaining to you." And they were like, you're our first, female CEO. So, I just wanted you to know that, that we support you, and we're sorry that so-and-so was mansplaining to you, etc. And I took a step back and I thought, like, I don't know that I would say that, I needed somebody to say somebody was acting this way to me and it was called mansplaining because I'm a woman. Because when I looked at that behavior that was being discussed, it was actually just a difference of how that particular individual communicated versus how I communicate. A little bit earlier, I said, I do, maybe it's a UFC-ism. I do like to be quiet at the beginning and listen, and then at the very end, speak. And so those who maybe right out of the gate like to, voice their opinions, and that was what this particular individual was doing. Maybe that's just their particular communication style. But when it was framed that they were mansplaining to me, there were two things. It was, this power dynamic, which actually I don't think existed in that particular case. It was, again, just a different communication style. And it was also almost saying, I'm here to support you because you're already in a role where you are disadvantaged because you're our first female CEO. And so I'm here to protect you by explaining that what just happened over there is not the way that we all feel. So I know I've gone into some detail with this example, but it's just, I do want to be careful in how I show up as a leader to also not perpetuate some of this binary conversation if it's not appropriate, if it's not systemic, if it is related more towards, individual communication or work styles.
And I know that we have other questions in the chat here, so I'll just add kind of a response to that. So I think it's important that we recognize that there are many genders, and that as we evolve in the workplace, we are talking about a spectrum here, and there are significant challenges with continuing to talk in a binary around gender, but we also have to acknowledge when it shows up. And so what I would say is kind of twofold in response. The first is that we don't live single issue lives. So there are no single issue struggles. We should be looking at the intersections between different identities and how they show up, as opposed to really saying it's a woman issue or it's a BIPOC issue or it's an ability issue. We should look at how they're intersecting. And I think the second thing is, I do believe that in workplaces, we have to do some real probing and questioning and clarifying around what these identities mean. So to this question of act like a man, I will just tell you, a lot of the men that I'm working with are going through a crisis right now because they don't know how to define masculinity at all. It's going through an evolution, and there are men's groups around the country, not men's rights activism groups. That's not a group that I'm going to engage with in this discussion, but men's groups where men are trying to figure out what it means to be a man. And so I think the other thing is, if the question is like how to be yourself in the workplace, I think, Brené Brown has done great work on socializing vulnerability and authenticity and their power in the workplace, and I really ascribe to that. And I would say, I believe that we need to be more precise in thinking through what are the stereotypes that we're confronting and how does that act on us. So from Hannah's example, you should be able to wear your makeup and your pretty dresses and feel confident without someone checking you and saying, this is frivolous, which is a very gendered word, for example. And we should be in a situation where we can say, when is this interpersonal and happening at the individual level, like it sounds like in the example that Seungah was sharing, versus when is this something that is tied to a larger cultural norm that needs to be challenged?
Yeah, thank you. And then just to address some of the questions in the chat really quick. So Rob asked, can you talk about how your human capital affected, for good or for bad, your ability to start and lead an organization when the time came? And anyone can chime in.
So having a really, good team of people around you is critical in starting and leading an organization. And so I know that there's a few mentors and few members of my team that are listening right now. And I know that there's a lot of things that we could not have accomplished without everybody just stepping in and stepping up. So, but one of the things that people must know as you lead them is that you truly care, that you won't ask them anything that you won't do yourself. So in order for people to follow you, they have to be able to trust and respect you. And that's really earned over time. It's something that doesn't happen overnight, and it goes back to your integrity. If you say something, you make sure you get it done. And it's also about how you make people feel, because people always remember how you treat them and how you make them feel. And once you have that trust and respect solidified, you and your team can move.
Yeah, thanks for answering that, Hannah. And then the last question for our session, Meyer asked, was there a moment of taking a leap of faith for any one of you? For example, leaving a nice job to start your company, and how did you make this decision?
In here, I mean, I am a very risk-averse person. And I was very comfortable with the idea of being someone's number two and building a career like that for myself. Plus, let's just think about where I was when I started my company. Realistically, when I decided I was going to do it, I had just turned 25. My husband was getting his PhD and was nowhere close to finishing. I mean, it's been 4 years and now he's finally finished, right? So I had a family to support. I had a job that everyone told me I was lucky to have. So one of the challenges of being an only in my space was that I was highly visible and that people thought I was really lucky. There are more people who work at Accenture than work in venture capital as an industry in the world. There are 800 venture firms globally. So it's this very elite space where there's a lot of gatekeeping and it's very difficult to break into. And I had this spot and I had this platform and I had my VentureBeat column and my Forbes column and people knew who I was and I had sort of an understanding of the ecosystem in the space. And it was a job that felt pretty secure, including, we talked about the fact that in VC during economic recessions, investing increases because prices are better in terms of the investment. So there was this sense of I would have a job that would be stable, which was a very big deal for my whole family, not just my husband, because that job stability was not something afforded to folks. I remember my mom was unemployed for 2 years when we moved here. And so going through this place of I need to be the provider has always been top of mind for me. Plus, I was not only young, but perceived as very young because as I mentioned before, I started college 2 years early. So people constantly thought that I had even less work experience than I did. And so there was just this element of saying, finally, the pain of staying the same was greater than the pain of change. And I decided to make the decision with a lot of encouragement from other people. 2 things that I'll share with this group. One, I came up with a number. I came up with how much money I needed to feel safe. And that's what I worked towards in launching this business. And for me, I couldn't have done it unless I had done that. I knew that I would be okay for 6 months, that my family would be okay for 6 months and living at the same standard that we were living without a significant downsize. And I had to do that math and I had to do that calculation. I also needed to know that I would have some access to income. And so I had sort of lined up opportunities to do like side consulting or like test what it was that I wanted to build early so that I would have that. Because for me, and this is true for many women founders, it wasn't just an investment for me to start this business, it was going to be my livelihood. And that is a differentiator between marginalized founders and dominant group founders. But the other thing was that I had mentors who were pushing me. And I remember it was Amanda Lannert, who's the CEO of Jellyvision, who said to me, if this is going to be a bigger learning opportunity than the one you have, then you have to take it because that's what matters. You should be asking yourself, am I learning? And if the answer is no, or you could learn more somewhere else, go do that. But this is your opportunity to learn all of the things that you've been saying you want to learn, so you should take it. And I think without that nudge, which was very dramatic because it happened on Christmas Eve when I was deciding if I was going to, she was outside of the Lush store with her daughter trying to get stocking stuffers last minute. It was that really helped push me over the edge. I had a plan and I now had that encouragement. And I would just say a leap of faith often requires external encouragement and there should be no shame in that. It does help to feel that you will be believed in and supported. So that would be my answer to this.
I'd love to give a very quick answer because I know we're running short on time. I feel like, so it's going to be in a different sphere, but innovation. So I think for entrepreneurs, whether it's a service or a good or whatever you're doing, whether it's a business model, there's some sort of innovation that you're bringing to the table, hopefully, that distinguishes what you're doing from what else is out there. And to me, that's the space where I've taken the most leaps of faith. And, like even in that patent sphere that I spoke about earlier, I think I have half a dozen patents with more pending. It is very much a leap of faith to feel like, okay, you've come up with something, you believe in it, you're going to do the work to see what else is out there, to make sure you get the details just right, to believe that there's a market for what you're creating and that you're going to now invest not only your time and your brain power and your effort, but your money into this thing. So I feel like as an entrepreneur, there are constant, times when you're taking these leaps of faith, even if they're smaller steps and smaller risks or larger ones, and even just setting up your business. And that is also part of the thrill, hopefully, for most of you out there in doing this work, because you do have that that really great opportunity to utilize all of your skills and creativity and imagination to do this work. All of your
And also to those of you listening, don't do this alone. There's so many resources all across the city, all across the country. And so when you're assessing whether you want to go ahead and leave that job to start a business, go seek the help of a mentor. If you go to SCORE, this is your taxpayers' dollars, and we are funded by Congress via the SBA. So, come and check us out, because really the mentoring sessions are always free. They're confidential, and they can go ahead and help you create the business plan and also assess whether your idea is feasible or not, which is also one of the top reasons why businesses fail. So again, just go to score.org or
awesome.
here locally, Chicago.score.org.
Thank you so much. And as I wrap up today, I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone who tuned in today. And thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. It truly was such an amazing, inspiring discussion today. And I really appreciate you all sharing your experiences. And so lastly, before we end, just some moderator things for Chicago Startup Week. We did get a raffle prize for this event. So from the audience, Katrina Williams, you will be walking away with a $15 Amazon gift card. That's funny, you just typed in the chat too. So if you could direct message me your email, that would be great. We appreciate you all staying for the entirety of the session. Again, for audience members, I encourage you all to head to our next events. There'll be 2 starting at 5:30, Startup Advising on Speed Dial or Stepping Out of Stereotypes, so similar to this session. And then in order to get there, again, just to navigate, hop in, click on the sessions, and you can navigate to all the different sessions throughout the week. And yes, Seungah or Alida and Hannah, I know you promoted SCORE. If anyone wants to promote any last minute things, you guys are amazing people doing amazing things. So I'm sure the audience would love to hear about anything. If you have last plugs.
I just sent everyone a discount code on our website, empowered.com.
Cool. Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, Ethos looking for intern, Chicago SCORE, great mentorship, and Empowered is doing such amazing things. So thank you all again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their days.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everyone.
Stay well.